Welcome to the frame assembly tutorial for the Vulture. In this video, I'm going to show you how to put together one of these babies. First, let's start with assembling the arms to the sandwich plate and the top plate. So just a heads up, this is a prototype frame, so some things may look slightly different than yours. For one, this press nut hole looks a little gnarly because I drilled it out myself with a hand drill, but yours are going to look a lot cleaner than this. Okay, let's get started here. You got a couple bags of hardware provided that you should empty out into a safe container on your workspace. First, let's start with assembling the arms to the sandwich plate and the top plate. Just a heads up, before proceeding any further, if you are using a 20 by 20 flight stack for the Vulture, you're going to want to install your flight stack screws before attaching the sandwich plate and arms because the holes are slightly blocked. Part of the arm design is utilization of these silicone rubber pads between the arms. So this stuff is provided in the kit, and you can pull out two of these small rectangles, peel the backing off of each of them, and stick them as accurately as you can onto the flat portion of two of the arms. Just like that. So we got two arms with rubber and two arms without. And all four arms are exactly the same. Before starting, you're going to have to consider whether you're going to use an SMA extension for your video transmitter. Oftentimes with the DJI-03 air unit or the Caddx Vista, it comes with a stock antenna, which is 100% compatible with the Vulture by attaching it to the feet, like so. But if you plan to use some kind of extension like this, you're going to be mounting it to the top plate with this 3D print. So for these rear two holes, you're going to want to use this 25mm countersunk screw instead of the regular 16mm countersunk screw. So for this example, we will proceed as if we're using the SMA extension for a long-range build. Okay, let's get to work. First off, let's Loctite all of these nuts on the top plate. So I want you to go in from the back side of these press nuts and give it a quick little dab. Okay, we're going to do this one screw at a time. Take a 25mm countersunk screw if you plan to use SMA extensions for your video transmitter. And we're going to call this the rear. Even though this is a symmetrical part, I'm designating this as the rear portion of the drone. So let's put one screw, one long screw here, put it through the middle hole on the arm such that the horizontal portion is like that. Flip it over, and then choose any outside corner of the top plate, I guess this one, and screw it in. Okay, maybe align that a little bit, and let's do the partner arm. Keep in mind this arm has rubber on it, so we want its partner to have no rubber. Installing this arm, instead of using a long 25mm countersunk screw, we're going to use a shorter 16mm one. So put that in there and screw it in. And for these screws, you can tighten them so they're just very gently snug. Next, line up the inner holes such that they're as symmetrical as possible. You can just eyeball it. You can set that aside and get two more 16mm countersunk screws. You want a rag like this to act as a cushion so that you can hold the frame like this and press down from the top. Pressing down from the top, and as you're applying downward pressure, install both of the 16mm countersunk screws, and you'll notice that if you favor one side more than the other, you can make it easier for the screw to go in. So for this screw, I'm going to push down and slightly that way in order to make it easier. And then you can start screwing it in once the pressure you apply relieves the tension on the screws. Okay, once you got them both down there, you can tighten them the rest of the way. Just don't over tighten so that you strip the heads. You just want them tightened such that they've bottomed out. Okay, let's tighten the outer screws the rest of the way. And repeat these steps for the other set of arms. Be sure to match the two longer screws so that they're on the same rear side of the drone. Okay, now that those arms are installed, we can get some isopropyl alcohol, spray down that rag, and clean off some of this Loctite. Okay, and give it a little bit of a bend test to see how flexible the arms are. They should be pretty rigid, and yeah, if you feel any slop or anything, moving around, maybe just double check the tightness of your screws. Let's install the flight stack screws. These are 22mm button head screws. You can install them from the top, flip it over, apply some Loctite at the base, and install a M3 hex nut. I find it helpful to use a screwdriver from the back side, and repeat this step for the other 3 holes. Now to tighten these flight stack screws, I take a screwdriver from the back side and then a mini crescent wrench from the other side, tighten it down with the screwdriver all the way, and then torque it down maybe like 30 degrees or so. And maybe wipe down that Loctite with a little Q-tip here. And the central structure is finished. Next, let's prepare the front plates. Both front plates are the exact same parts, so it doesn't matter which you choose to be the left and the right. So we'll call this the right. Now, if you're using a 19 by 19 millimeter camera, you'll want to use these FPV shims. If you're using a 20 by 20, such as the DJI-03 unit, you do not need this TPU spacer. But I'm using the Caddx Vista, so I'm going to install these. The way you do that is you insert these 2 little plugs into each hole, and it helps to press it with the tip of your thumb, and just guide them in there and press it in so it kind of clicks into place. And repeat that for the other side, making it so that it's a mirrored pair. Okay, get your 20mm standoffs and your 6mm M3 button head screws ready. The middle standoff for this front plate is going to be housed inside of this 3D printed bracket. Prepare the bracket by inserting an M3 hex nut and press it into place with the back of a screwdriver. Just like that. Then slide the standoff into the bracket and once again press it in with some force so that it's reasonably flush like this. Then with some Loctite on a 6mm button head screw, insert that into the carbon fiber, and the direction for this is important. We want this hex nut to be facing downward and toward the middle of the drone. Okay, and so you can line that up as reasonably straight as you can and tighten it. Next, let's do this hole, Loctite on 6mm, 20mm standoff, finger tight, and once more on this hole, 6mm Loctite. Next, we're going to mount the other side and use 6mm button head screws for all 3 of these holes. And you can go ahead and tighten these by tightening from one side and then flipping it over to tighten the other side. And then for this middle one, you can loosen and give about 1/2 millimeter of space. Alright, set that aside for now. Now for the rear plates. Same deal with the front plates, duplicate parts, but this time part of the equation are these rail pads, which are going to be mounted onto the sides. So what I want you to do is Loctite both holes of 3 standoffs. Then, starting with the right rear plate, let's install this 3D printed rail pad using a dry 8mm button head screw. Run it through, then place it through the carbon fiber hole, then use one of these Loctited 20mm standoffs, and repeat that for the other 2 holes here. Next, let's get a 6mm button head screw and run it through this corner hole and get a dry standoff. And finally prepare one of these other 20mm brackets and slide it into the standoff like that. And a 6mm button head screw with Loctite, insert that into this hole and place the bracket such that the nut is facing downward and the lumpy lump is facing inward. Get that aligned and tighten it up as much as you can, so it should look like this. Okay, let's mount the other side of this rear plate. Get an 8mm button head screw, put it through the 3D print, through the carbon fiber, and into the pre-Loctited standoffs. Next, get a 6mm with some Loctite, put it through the bracket standoff, and another one for this corner standoff. And you can go ahead and tighten all of the screws down by flipping it over on each side. And for these rail pad screws, you don't need to tighten them super hard, just enough so that they're snug. Alright, looking good. For this screw, let's loosen it about 0.5 millimeter. Now that you finish your front plates and your rear plates, you're going to want to go ahead and install your motors and your ESC and flight controller and your VTX, whether it's a DJI 03, Cadex Vista, HD0, Walksnail Avatar thing. And FYI, your kit comes with this VTX stack mount, which is compatible with 20 by 20 and 25.5 by 25.5 hole spacing. And don't worry, I have a build overview video showing how I laid out my components. Be sure to check out the Vulture playlist to watch that. So go ahead and get to work on those electronics. After you've installed your electronics, you can go ahead and start mounting the front and rear plates. But just a heads up, if you do need to service your drone, you don't necessarily have to remove the front and rear plates every single time, depending on what you need to do, like swap out motors, swap out an arm. You don't need to remove these every single time. Sometimes you do, but you'll get used to the workflow pretty quickly. Okay, we got to mount the front plate on the correct side. So in this case, I need to flip this around because these rear screws are meant for the VTX SMA extensions, which are going to be toward the rear of the drone. You want to line up the slots as best as you can and slide that front plate in there until the bracket on the inside lines up with the hole. Before installing the rear plate, you'll want to install the bottom plate into these slots. And when installing the rear plate, you'll need to line up 4 slots instead of just the 2. So it takes a little bit more finesse. And you can press them together using your hands like this, or pushing down. You'll just want to make sure that the rear bracket also lines up with the hole, and everything looks nice and straight down below. Next, to lock together the front and rear plates, let's get a 12 millimeter button head screw with a conservative amount of Loctite and run it in through the top through the 3D printed bracket underneath. And tighten that down. Repeat the same for the rear bracket. Remember how we left these two 6 millimeter screws slightly loosened? Now we can go ahead and tighten those down. What that does is compresses the carbon fiber joint between the vertical and horizontal plates. Alright, next let's secure this bottom portion using these joists. To install these, you're going to need 2 more 20 millimeter standoffs. Get an 8 millimeter button head screw, run it through one of the joists, and insert it like so. Then place a 20 millimeter standoff between the 2 plates and screw that in there. Get another 8 millimeter button head screw with Loctite and install the screw and the standoff. Repeat this for the other side. Don't forget that Loctite. And go ahead and tighten from both sides, flipping it around each time. So it should look something like this. Next, we can install our landing spar using, once again, 8 millimeter button head screw with some Loctite on it. Insert it through the top or the bottom, depending on your perspective, through the press nuts. And there's just 2 of them here. Go ahead and tighten these down all the way. And so to mount the feet, you just orient them in this way, press them on there, get it started, and then press with some force. And they just kind of click into place. Okay, next up is the camera mount. Let's prepare the front plates by inserting these polypropylene slider bushings. All you gotta do is insert the tapered portion into the hole from the outside and click it into place just like that. And then go around and make sure that each one is pressed firmly in place and is nice and straight and flush. Next, install 2 30 millimeter smooth standoffs into these bushings. They should slide right in quite easily, and you should feel that they slide back and forth with minimal force. Next, get 2 more of these 30 millimeter standoffs and a 6 millimeter button head screw with Loctite, and we're going to install these standoffs to the fangs. Okay, and tighten up these screws by flipping sides. You'll want to avoid using a wrench like this to grip the standoffs, but if you do have to, grip them on the side like this and not in the center where the camera clip is going to snap on. Next, install the fangs over the front plate and slide the fangs onto either side of the two 30mm standoffs here, and then line up the holes as best as you can. Then go in with a 8mm button head screw with plenty of Loctite. Be generous with this one. And screw that into the rear bushing. Flip that around and go in from the other side with another 8mm button head screw. And do the same trick as before. You can hold this part with your finger, tighten it as much as you can, flip it over, tighten, flip it over, tighten. Next we're going to use these thumb screws. Just insert them into the front pair of bushings. Do not use Loctite since these will be removed from time to time. And tighten these down all the way and inspect that you can still slide the top fangs back and forth easily. You can also inspect the fit by pulling up and down on the fangs, and there should be minimal slop. The only slop should be side to side. Next, we're going to install these silicone pads. Prepare the surface using some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip. Then you can go ahead and peel off this battery pad and remove these clearance holes. Then go ahead and peel off the backing. Don't forget to remove all 6 holes like I did and install it onto the sandwich plate, aligning the holes so that the screws can clear. That's looking nice. Next, let's get these rail pads out. Peel off the backing and stick it onto the real rail pads. The rear rail pads. Now it should look something like this. And I don't recommend that you use a softer substance such as Umagrip or other foam padding, and the reason why is because when using larger batteries, if you cantilever them off the back end in order to offset the center of gravity when using larger cinema cameras, you want a nice rigid joint between the battery and the drone. If you have a soft substance, the battery can actually oscillate back and forth, causing tuning issues. Next, let's install the battery straps. There's 2 ways to do this. You can fit the battery toilet tank style or longitudinally. You'll just have to play around with it and see which style works best for you. So to do this, get the 300mm strap for the toilet tank mounting. It might help to actually loosen the front camera mount. Place the strap in from the bottom and guide it by using your finger and just kind of help it along. You can see it poking out from there. Then you can either use a tool or your fingernail, whatever you have, to just guide it along. And I usually find that 2 standoffs is usually the right amount of spacing for toilet tank style battery mounting. And I recommend you use 2 battery straps when doing rear mounting of the battery. You may find you'll be using extra large batteries for cinelifting purposes, and having 2 battery straps really allows the battery to stay secure and not shake around or anything during flight. If you're using SMA extensions for your antennas, you can mount this 3D print over the top of the rear threaded thing. Stick a washer down, add some Loctite, and install an M3 hex nut. And you can use a 5.5 box socket driver to tighten that down. When installing the SMA extension, remove the nut and the washer and plug that into the bottom here, just like that. And I don't bother with using the lock washer, I just use the nut straight on top. And a helpful trick is to use a 8-box socket driver to tighten the hex nut. If you have a dual diversity antenna, you have a second one of these mounts included in your kit. Alright, now that the drone's basically done, we can prepare these camera clips. There's actually 2 of them that come with your kit for swapping between cameras. You can install a 1/4" countersunk Phillips 3-head screw. They're 1/2 inch long, and when installing onto the Sony RX02, you just insert it into the threads and keep the lever portion facing forward. And tighten it down, make sure it's nice and straight, and just prevent it from twisting as you tighten the screw down. To attach the camera, first press the fangs so that they're facing away from you, and then attach the clip on this rear standoff so that it's on closer to this side than this side, and then you shoehorn it in and then press down, and that you should see this little lever click into place. Be sure to inspect that you can still see some sliding action in the isolation mount. And it's the same process for the Blackmagic Pocket 4K and other DSLR type cameras. For GoPros though, you need a little extra modification. I sell these GoPro fingers replacements which have a 1/4 thread on them. They just go for $10 on my website, so easy to pick up. And in order to install the quick release system, you need to add an extra little spacer here, which comes with the kit, and thread that onto the screw. Then insert the screw into the camera quick release tab. Push it into the 1/4 hole of the GoPro, applying some force such that you're bending the nylon washer a little bit, forcing it in there, and then proceed to screw it in the rest of the way. So that little spacer is deforming into a cone and making it so the screw length is effectively shorter, so you don't bottom out these shallow threads. And for bulky Komodo type cameras, you might have to pre-install the camera clip beforehand. So install the 1/4" screw, so just install it, then undo the knobs a little bit to give it a little bit of elevation. Once you've done that, you can flip over the drone or the camera and mount them generally together, and then use a Phillips 3 long screwdriver to screw it in from the bottom. This bottom screwing technique is only necessary for big bulky cameras like the Komodo or Sony FX6, but for SLR type cameras like the Pocket 4K, you can just click them into place like usual. And for larger cinema cameras, I recommend using battery straps daisy chained together like this, crosswise. Just make sure that the strap is over the top of the angle adjustment, and then you cinch it down, and then go in from the other side underneath the other arm. Make sure it's above the other thumb screw, and then you can really cinch it down. And this makes the camera mount extra rigid. For the final touches on this frame, we can install these side shrouds, which protect the internals from grass, mud, water, and other debris that's flung around by the propellers. So you go in at an angle, and then you make sure it's flush against the top plate. Make sure the groove is seated on one side, and then go to the other side and squeeze the side shroud until it clicks into place, and just repeat that for the other side. Fancy. Next up are the propeller guards. If you wish to use the Vulture as a Cinewhoop and carry larger, heavy cameras with propeller protection, then you want to buy one of these kits to go along with your Vulture frame. So let me show you how to put one of these together. So this is one side of the propeller guard kit. The kit comes with 4 of these garter stays, 4 of these barbed couplers, 4 of these end caps, 10 of these short segments of tubing, and 4 of these long tubing segments. So I'll show you how to put together just one side. So you want to start out with these long outer rims. Install the garter stays just by pressing them on, and it's all just friction fit. Very easy to assemble, no tools required. And slide these garter stays on until it makes roughly a 90-degree angle. Next, install 2 of these short segments into each rim. just by pressing them in there all the way, such that the curved side is facing downward. And just straighten those out a little bit. Next, let's connect the two halves using this short segment. Install the barbed coupler and have the short segment be in the opposite curvature as the rims. And it just presses on like that. And proceed to install these little end caps onto the ends to make a nice, clean, professional look. And repeat this for the other side. To install a set of propeller guards to the Vulture, you insert the tubing over these nubs onto the arm like this. And then once those are fully seated, then we can take this little locking nub and insert it into the motor screw hole. Just press it in there. And you might have to stretch it a little bit to get it in there, so it's nice and secure. And just double check that each of these segments are roughly 90 degrees relative to each other, and that the propeller rims are going to be roughly in line with the propellers when installed on the motors. To remove the propeller guards, you grip here on the tab, pull that way and upward. And then once those are released, you can pull outward to release the tubing from the nubs. And there you go. That's all for the Vulture frame assembly video. If you want to know how to install your components, I do have a build overview video in the Vulture playlist, along with a design overview if you're more interested in the theory of why I designed it in this way.